Well, good evening and welcome to everybody. Here we are again on a Thursday evening for the Dunham Camera Club meetings. I hope that you're finding them all interesting and helpful, and of course it's good to have a little meet up even though it's only on the chat. So let's see who's about. Just going to rewind the comments, and also I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to click another button or two here, put that over there, and you should now be able to see me. So who have we got with us this evening? We've got first in the auditorium this evening was Gail. Gail put Yippee got first place, but in actual fact Gail usually logs on much later. So well done to Gail, first time in the front seat. And Jill, good evening. Who else? Graham H, good evening. Sue, hi Sue, great having a little catch up during the week. It's always good to have a little catch up with people. Who else has popped in? There was a few bits of conversation going on there. Doreen was the next one in. Good evening, Doreen. Good evening, Vivian. Welcome to you both. Hope you're both well. Jim was coming on strong there. Next one in the auditorium. Caroline and Dave, good evening to you all. Who else? Oh, flicked me button a bit too quick there. Peter. Good evening, Peter. Good evening, Paul. No, Paul's not on yet. So who else have we got this evening? Alan, good evening, Alan. Ray, long distance viewer this evening then, Ray. Coming in from Chelmsford. Blooming heck. Are you doing another roof? No, maybe it's not at the same place as you was the other week. So, but welcome to you, Ray. And Bob, good evening, Bob. Allegedly, yeah, we're all well. Well, I think we're all well. Babysitting the granddaughter today. Right. Good evening, Michael Hughes. Good evening, Vera. Who else have we got? Good. I'm pleased you let me know, GH. Saves me asking later. So that's great. Jill, Doreen, Michael Hudston. Good evening, Michael. Pleased you could make it, and welcome to everybody. I'm hoping to get in fairly early this evening with onto the questions and answers, etc. Most of the answers I did know straight off the top of my head, but I've also added you a little bit of extra information as well into the slideshow. So done it this time through a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll be giving you a few tips, etc. as we go along. Who else has just popped in? Excuse me. Good evening, Diva. I hope you're well this evening, and good evening, Jan, if you're watching. Hopefully you are. Not too sure just at the moment who anyone else is watching that hasn't signed in. Just if anybody is watching, just drop a line in the chat. I'm nodding down there because that's where the chat comes up on the other screen. So do just put a little hello and let us know that you're watching along with the members of the Dunham Camera Club. So please, if you're not a member of the club, it doesn't matter. You're very welcome to watch. We are doing this publicly, so you're very welcome to watch and join in. So just make sure that you subscribe for the future, and of course, if you enjoy the evening, make sure that you hit that like button. So right, good evening everybody, and as I was just saying, this evening is an evening of Q&A night. This is part one. I'm not sure whether there'll be a part two of the Q&A. It depends how quickly we get through them. I've got 38 slides to go through, so hopefully that will give you a good explanation and give you the answers to your questions, and also help other people who didn't send the questions in. I must admit, I've been doing photography since 1985, and I will be very honest, I'm still learning. So, right, let's just say a final hello to those that have just dropped in. Good evening, Dane. And good evening, Mark. So good evening to everybody now, and we're going to make a bit of a start. And this evening, as I say, it's a Q&A night. Our first question here, it was asked, I forgot, just a quick notice before I go any further. Tonight is the final night for the entries for the natural history competition, which is the final of the potty comps. So do make sure, if you've got any entries still to come in, to make sure they're in by last thing tonight. If you are really struggling, do get in touch with Jill, but you'll need to get them in first thing tomorrow morning. So make sure that they're all in. So, right, on to this evening's Q&A night. First thing, we had a question come in about white balance. So, why change off auto? The question was, there's been a lot of talk recently about using a white or a grey card to set white balance. But as the light changes constantly, is it not just best to use auto white balance unless shooting under specific artificial lighting, and of course white balance with flash? When it says white balance, you can see there's a zigzag there, meaning the setting for flash white balance accordingly. Just as a little thing, I'm going to say a big thank you to the bits and bobs on Google. There's not a lot, but a few little bits that came from Google from there. This isn't a very good slide particularly, but I wanted to put this one in before the next one, because it shows you some settings across on the right hand side here that you will all have on your cameras, and these different settings show the colour temperature of that part of the day, or the shaded day, or in a shaded area, or in a flash, using flash, using tungsten light and fluorescent light. All of them are down this side here, and each of these relate to a temperature, and the temperatures range anywhere from 15,000 K, K stands for Kelvin, down to 1,000 K Kelvin. So the lower the number, the more orangey the light will become. So on old cameras, we used to get our pictures back from Boots, the chemist, in the little packages, we all remember them, and we used to take them out, and we was quite happy to see the ones in the house that were orange, simply because the cameras at that time just couldn't cope with the different colour temperatures. So we got colour casts within the images, but we didn't have anything better, so consequently we put up with it. But that's what this is all about. So here's the colour temperature chart. These are the light sources down the right side. So you've had a good look at that now. I'm going to go on to the next one simply because it's a much better one. So the reason I showed you the last one, as I said, was because it had the symbols on your camera under the white balance settings that you can change to give a different color temperature and bring the white balance back to what your eye will see it. Our eyes are much far superior to the camera, and we see colors and our eyes adjust for color very easily. So there's a very quick resume that you can actually read this time of the temperatures of candlelight, temperatures of colour within the spectrum of the range and temperature colours. So we'll just go on a little bit. We then go to the grey card, and all this will come into being in a minute or two. But when the question was asked about, is it best just not to use auto white balance, then auto white balance will do its best. So consequently, it is its best. It's not an absolute spot on reading of the temperature of the light that you are viewing. So the reason that you would use either a grey card or a white card is to get a reflection from the ambient light that is in the area that you're in, whether that be inside, whether that be outside. And what you do, you take a reading from the camera onto the card, you focus onto the card, whether it be the grey card or the white card, and I'll go on to something else in a minute, and you set your camera up to that reading. Now, once you've taken the picture of the grey card, that then sends messages to the camera how to set the white balance for that particular situation. Now, the problem came in years gone by where people used a grey card outside, and then in 10 minutes the sun came out. So you needed to take another reading, which can become a problem. So hence the reason that camera white balance and auto white balance became very, very popular with photographers, because it was doing its best, and it does do a very, very good job of getting the colour temperature right and giving you the picture that you see at the end of the day. Now, as we all know, when you go into Photoshop, when you go into your editing program, you can often, if you're working in RAW format, you can often change that color temperature to give you a temperature that you like on the image. In other words, you can make it a little bit cooler or a little bit warmer. Now, this chart here simply shows 18% grey is the exact grey exposure to give you an even tone of colour throughout the spectrum of the image. Now, if you go to different percentages, as you can see, you're underexposing or you're overexposing. So consequently, that's how the grey chart works, and it's all about getting a correct reading for colour temperature. This next one is about setting up your camera for the grey or white card reading. Excuse me. So before we get to that particular one, on the back of the camera, and this is a Canon, you can go into your white balance settings, and you will see various settings for various things, and that gives its best ability, or the camera the best ability to give you the right color temperature. So each of these you can change for the certain situation. Now, setting up your camera for the grey or white card is used on this end one. So you would go to this end one, which I always think looks a bit like a flower, but you can go to this end one and you choose that one, and it'll give you two options. It'll give you an option to choose a picture within the pictures that you've taken to set as the white balance reading, or it'll give you the option to take a picture and register that picture to the white balance setting that you want the camera to use. Now, don't get too hung up on this, but as a professional photographer myself, I used to do gym photography. I used to do equestrian indoor photography, and these types of places, there was a lot more as well, but these sort of places have different sorts of lighting. You have sodium lighting, you have tungsten lighting, you have fluorescent lighting, you have heaters which glow red like the old school ones. So you had to set up the white balance, because as you go around the room and you take a picture in the large in equestrian, the big place you're in, etc., the colour temperature changes between the lights. So if one light's to your left and one's to your right, then you have to check that the lighting is giving you a good reading, so that people aren't in one picture red, in another one proper colour, etc. So if you set your white balance, they will all be the same. And as I've just said, you do this via this setting, which looks like the a little flower. It'll give you various ones, and you can set that, as I say, in two ways. So do check that out. I'm not going to go into any further detail, but the way you would do it is to get your grey card or your white card, or I used to use if it was in a gym, I used to get somebody with a white t-shirt on, and I used to stand them in the middle of the floor. I used to take a picture of them and then tell the camera to use that picture as my white balance. So then, as I went around the room, under the lights, under the heaters, etc., etc., my white balance wouldn't change because it was on auto white balance. So here's coming to the answer. Is it best to leave auto white balance on auto? If you're outside, yes, it will do a good job, because as the colour temperature changes with the sun coming out, with the shadows, with the clouds, etc., etc., it'll give you a very, very good reading. And of course, you can tweak it at the end of the day in post. So if you're indoors, no, you then really need to take control of the white balance. If you're doing a lot of shots, and you need to set it via the user setting that you can provide. So I'm hoping that's beginning to answer the question. If you're indoors, the second thing to do is to make sure that you activate the anti-flicker setting. The anti-flicker setting means that the camera will only take a picture when the light is fully lit. So things like tungsten lights, etc., various lights, all of the lights in fact, they all flicker on and off. Your eye can't see it, but they're flickering. And consequently, if you're taking pictures at the rate we can do now, where it's anywhere from, well, minimum nowadays is sort of 5 frames a second, up to, well, with some of our cameras, some of the Olympus users, etc., we can take pictures up to 60 frames a second. Not that we would possibly be using that setting indoors, but we can do. Now that would give you these different settings just from one run of pictures. So as you can see, these pictures here, some are duller, some are brighter, and that's with just one press of the trigger. Now if that was taking, say, a dozen pictures of a gymnast on a floor in the gym, and you've got orange lights and you've got a blue or a red mat underneath them, they're going to be changing colour, and these show all the differences just from one press of the shutter of one picture that you're hoping to get. So it does change, so make sure that you've got your anti-flicker on. Right, so in summary, for general photography, use auto white balance settings, but do try to use the relevant preset camera setting. That's them little symbols applicable to the photographic situation. Indoor photography, take a test shot or two around the room. If the colour of your images change, use a white grey card. By the way that I say if the images change, that means if one time it looks a little bit orange, another time it looks a little bit red, and another time it's a bit normal. If you're under fluorescent lights, for instance, fluorescent lights do change to give you a green cast. Modern fluorescent tubes, though, are white balance, so they do give quite a good colour. But the older fluorescent tubes used to give you a green. So just check a few test shots. Indoor with coloured lighting, stroke heating. If you want to be precise, you will need to take a specific reading for the ambient light. Now, by the ambient light, choose an area in that space. Now, this could be a space outside, it could be a space indoors, wherever, but choose that area carefully to get an overall average setting. You will still get pictures which are different as you go under the lights or away from a light. So, hey ho, you know, you can't get it always. When working under electric lighting, make sure that you've got your anti-flicker on, which I've explained what anti-flicker is, so that's good. Anything to add to that? If you're in a studio and you're doing portrait photography, you should always set your settings through manual. So all of your settings are manual, and you would also set your white balance, etc., etc., to your flash, so that everything's precisely the same. So when you do your editing at the end, you can do batch editing on quite a few images without having to do singular editing, because they're all set at a certain shutter speed, a certain f-stop, a certain white balance, etc., etc. Right, flash. Question. Apart from using TTL flash, where the camera and flash gun talk to each other, could you explain high sync and the different slow modes from curtain sync and rear curtain sync? Yeah, good question. I don't think a tremendous amount of us use the facilities that we have in the camera. It is known that a general photographer on a modern camera will use approximately 15 to 20% of the features on the camera out of the 100% that we've got. So, you know, it is one of those things that unless we get deep into it, then we don't know exactly what all of these things mean. So TTL is through the lens. So you slide on your flash at the top, you tighten it up and switch it on. You can then let the camera talk to the flash. The flash takes a reading at the half a press. It'll send the messages back to the camera, and everything will fire just enough flash to light that subject up, and you'll have seen the beam come from a flash to the person or to the subject when people have been taking photographs, and that's taking all these readings through the lens. So that's what TTL stands for, through the lens. Now, there is a few that people get mixed up with here, and the next one is ETTL. Now, there's two for ETTL. ETTL is expose to the left. There is also an ETTR, which is exposed to the right. Now, that's to do with the exposure, either overexposing a bit or underexposing a bit. But that's what ETTL is for. It's to do with exposure. The next one is ETTL again. Now, this is a term commonly used in flash photography where you're using a flash unit on the top of the camera, and that's evaluative through the lens. So you can see why you get it confused, because there is terminology that's very, very similar to each other. TTL is the term which we would use generally. ETTL is evaluative through the lens. Now, the other one that some people always use to, there's another ETTL, which is electronic through the lens, and that was the electronic system working through the lens and through the flash to give you the correct exposures. So that's that one. Forgot the question now, apart from using DDL. Oh yeah, we're moving on to it. So here we go on the bits and bobs. So flash sync speeds first. Sync speeds, this all depends on your camera, but generally the sync speed of most cameras will either be 200 or 250th of a second. The reason being that the duration of the flash is synced, hence the sync speeds, synced to the exposure speed. Now, if you get the exposure speed wrong, then you will get a problem, and I'll show you what it is in a minute. You will need to check your specific camera for your flash sync speed. I can't tell you what everybody's is. You need to check it, but generally 200, 250th. Now, there's a lot on this screen, but what happens if you use the wrong shutter speed for your flash? If you use the correct shutter speed, you will get an image like this first one here. So correctly exposed from side to side, top to bottom. The next one, and if you're slowly reading the red writing at the bottom, you will see the what it's all about. It's images taken at 1/3 of a stop increments with a flash. And this is with a flash which is fitted to the camera generally. Excuse me. The first is at the 250th of a second, which is the native speed for the camera, which I know that's a Canon camera because I'm choking, excuse me, because that's what I always used to use. Some Canon cameras, in fact, were 200, so just be careful on that one as well. The next one is at 320ths of a second, so now you can begin to see a little black bar, and so on, until such a time as when you get up to 1250ths of a second, if you're too fast a shutter speed, it's just black, so you don't get a picture. 1/320th is just about usable, but you would have to crop it down just to get rid of that little bit of black on the edge. But that's how it works, and that is the problem if you use the wrong shutter speed. Now, what's happening is that you have two shutters, two planes that are moving. So as they move, one goes over the lens that way and one over the lens that way. Now, this is what's happening with these black areas. Your flash is going off behind whilst the shutter is moving across the plane. So that's why you get this blackout. H.S.S, high speed sync. So high speed sync. So to achieve a fully exposed image at higher shutter speed, say daylight, where you're using your flash to fill in. I hope you all know what fill in means. That just means that the ambient light is bright enough to light the subject, but you have some slightly darker areas from, say, a shadow. At weddings, when I used to do weddings, the hat, ladies' hats, it comes over their eyes, so down to about the nose is in shadow. So you use fill-in flash, and that just pops a bit of flash in and just fills in the brightness where those shadows are. You need to make sure that your specific flash has the high speed sync option and turn it on. So the fill-in flash was slightly different to the high speed sync flash, but I wanted to add that in. What does that do for you? You can now set a higher or lower shutter speed into the thousandths of a second, and having set the flash for this operation, it will now pulse. Instead of going bang, one flash, shut down, it'll keep on doing pulses of flash, and it will fill in during the duration. Operation, it will now pulse with lots of flashes during the time of the shutter operation, lighting the whole image rather than just at the start of the opening of the shutter. This is just a quick explanation. Do check your specific camera and flash to make sure the operation is possible. High speed sync flash is not available on all cameras, so do check your books and make sure you've got it. So here's a little bit of a idea of how it all works. Front curtain sync, that means as soon as the curtain starts to open, will give you this effect. So it'll freeze the action here, and then as it's pulsing, it will pick up a little bit of movement here. If you use rear curtain sync, it will pick up it'll give you the pulses early, but then it'll give the big flash at the end, giving you the sharp object at the end. Great way to get different movement into a subject. If you're doing motorbikes or cars or something like that, and you're in a position where you can use a flash, the rear curtain sync one is the one you want to be using, because you don't want the movement in front of the subject, you really want the movement behind the subject. Okay, hope you've read all the rest of that. I've just realised what the time is and I'm not going to get on very quick. Colour space, explained simply. Question: RGB, is there any benefit from shooting in Adobe RGB to record more colours? Well, RGB for a start records more colour than sRGB, etc, etc. If after any post-production it's finally saved as an sRGB. Now we want images saving for the club as an sRGB preferred. The only difference between RGB and sRGB is sRGB is just a different standard of RGB, and RGB stands for red, green and blue, and they're the three prime colours that make up the image. And so sRGB gives better, more consistent results, and the same or brighter colours using Adobe RGB is one of the leading causes of colours not matching between monitor and print. Whereas if you use sRGB, and that's what your monitors use, sRGB is the world's default colour space. Use it and everything should look great everywhere. That means on your tablet, on your phone, on your desktop, etc. Moving subject photography. Another question that came in. I'm hoping to attend a cycle event in September 2020. Only as an observer. I would welcome any advice, tips on how to obtain some decent photos. I went a bit too quick there, didn't I? I'm getting click happy. Obtain some decent photos, i.e. camera settings, scene selection, etc, etc. So, firstly, as a photographer, the very first thing you must do is to learn how to lock on. If you can't lock on to the subject and pan with the subject, which we'll go into in a minute, you aren't going to get a good picture anyway. To learn to lock on, you need to set your camera and get your lens that you're going to use. You need to pick it up, you choose something in the garden, you say, right, there's a post over there, so I don't know whether I'm pointing yet, there's a post over there, and you need to point over there with your camera and all of a sudden turn round, and you should be on the subject every time until you can get that onto the subject every time. You don't need to go any further, because if you can't lock on for a start, you ain't going to get a good picture. So anything moving, whether it's wildlife, whether it's cars, motorbikes, whatever, you need to learn to lock on. So camera over there, move across to whatever you've chosen, the window or the brick or whatever, bang, and you should have a good picture. That's the locking on effect. Secondly, don't use a scene selection. The scene selections on cameras are for very amateurs. Some of you can sit there and say, well, I'm an amateur photography, but at the end of the day, I'm talking about starter amateurs, really starter amateurs. Next, panning technique. What is panning? There's no gold in photography, I'm afraid, so it's nothing to do with that panning. I hope you felt that was funny. Panning is the ability to firstly lock on to a subject and continue to track it smoothly. People say, oh yeah, I can do panning, but can they actually do it smoothly without the movement up and down, without stopping and being jerky? Panning is a technique. You must get into it. Smoothly is the ultimate part of this exercise. Practice movement from left to right, right to left. Zooming whilst panning. So as the subject is up at that end, you need to be fully out. As it comes towards you, you need to be rotating the zoom so that it's the same size in the frame, because it's no good tiny at that end but big at this end. You need it the same size in the frame all the time. So zoom in there, zoom out as it's coming to me. So I'm glad you found it funny, Graham. So zooming whilst panning as well. So get all of this into your technique. Approach and retreat, follow through. So as it's coming towards you, you've got to get used to that slower speed as it's coming towards you, then speed up as it's going past, and then slow down as it's going away, because you need to be taking pictures at the appropriate moment. Where to pick up the subject, where to stand. You need to be facing where you're going to take the subject. So if you've decided that the subject is going to be taken straight in front of you, you need to be stood facing that position. You then, when the motorbike, in this case cycle, is coming from the right, you need to twist the top half of your body, pick up the subject over there, bring it round so that you're in your most comfortable position when you go click, 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 and follow through. Don't stop clicking when you, don't stop moving when you start clicking. So as soon as you press the shutter, follow it through and keep pressing on continuous focus, which we'll come to in a minute. Where to take the pictures, just covered that. Where to stop. So choose a position where you want to start taking the pictures, which would be slightly to your right. Follow it through, slightly to your left, stop taking the pictures. So lenses, what do you want? Before putting into practice your newfound techniques from previous slides, consider what lenses you need. Is the subject going to be close, 24mm, or a bit further away, 100? Make sure that you get your right lens for the length of where you're going to be. If you don't know until you get there, make sure you take the full range of lenses that you've got. 24 to 100, 100 to 400. Make sure you take the lot. Do you need a prime lens or a zoom lens? Prime lenses are just a little bit sharper, but they only get a picture in one place. So, you have to preset your focus into one position and you take it in that one position. I think I went past one there, did I? Nope. So, settings. There isn't any. what do you want from your image? You know, I can't tell you on that day what your settings are going to be. So you've got to know whether you want to freeze the subject, that, as it says, that jet skier or that bike going over the top of a hill where it's taken off, whatever. Motorsport, on the track, fast sport, slower sport. I mean, I used to do gravity sports, which is literally what it says. So it's the weight of the person going down a hill, and they're on a bike, they're on a go-kart, whatever they're on. It's just them being propelled. Motorsport, are they taking off? You've got to decide any of these things that you're reading now, any of them and every one of them is different. So you can't really give an exact one. The only thing I will say is that your focal length for motorsport at a starting point wants to be at least the focal length of the lens. So if it's 100 millimeters, your lens, you need to be at a shutter speed of 100 millimeter. But when you're going to be specific about what you want from your image, how much movement do you want in the picture? Because if you've got a 100 millimeter lens and you said, well, Grahame says that I need to be 100th of a second, then at the end of the day, you're probably not going to get a lot of movement in the background. You might need, with that 100 millimeter lens, to go down to a 20th of a second. So you've got to work yourself out as to what the settings are. F-stops, you know, I'm going to click through these because I've got to get on. Zoom lens, subject relatively close, blah, 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 etc. Camera mode, you could set it on manual, but as you move from left to right, you will get a difference in light. So often I'll choose my shutter speed because I want to pan with the subject and I want movement in the background. F-stop, you then have to balance your f-stop with the ISO so that it makes sure that you can get the right exposure. Now, some cameras, only a few, but not every single one, some of them you can have auto ISO when you're in manual mode. Some cameras you can't. So hope you've read that by now. I'm going to move on because, as I say, I am realizing that I'm getting quite behind. Settings, as I said, there's no starting point, but here goes. Give it a go at this, and I'm going to do the next one so that you can have a good read. Give it a try, but then you have to play yourself to get what you want. You've got to go for, it's no good doing a racing car at 2.8, otherwise the front or the back of the car isn't going to be in focus. You need probably 5.6. So it's all going to have to come, I'm afraid, from practice. But if you sort of start in some of these areas, you shouldn't be too bad. Moving on swiftly. Oh yes, and always have the focus on constant focus. That means that it's tracking the subject. CAF, constant autofocus, whatever they call it on your camera, you need it. And as the thing moves, it will be constantly focusing as this subject moves. If anybody wants a further explanation, just please get in touch with me. There we go, and there's one courtesy of Grahame H. He did this a year or two ago, and this is what you want to be aiming for. Brilliant picture. Did Grahame very well, very well. Looks like there's some flash been put in there as well. Right, quickly on. Next question was about Canon 300mm. I've been told I cannot use a 1.4 or 2 times converter on my Canon 90D with the Canon 70-300 zoom. True or false? Why? Is there an effective way round it? No, but yes. The reason that you can't use it is because of the way that the lens and the converter are built. You can blame whichever you like, because the converter has a protruding part on the front of the converter that won't fit into the lens, or you could say the lens hasn't got enough room for the converter to go into it. So that's why you can't use it. But as you can see up there on the left, if you buy a Kenko 1.4 converter, apparently the Kenko 1.4 converter fits. I did a little bit of research on it. It says it fits, but don't take my word for it. Do some investigation before you pay out your money. And of course, a Kenko one is cheaper than a Canon one. You have to buy that. The only thing is, if you've got a camera that's say a 3.5 to and I think off the top of my head 5.6, it will be f8 all the time. So do be careful. In fact, it might be 6.3, but it will make it f8 all the time. You will not get below f8, so that will give you a hell of a depth of field. Right, a few answers to regularly answered question. What does M mean? What does M, manual mode, mean? You have to set the shutter speed, f-stop combined with ISO to obtain the correct exposure. So you're under totally control of the camera in manual. You have to set everything. What is the difference between JPEG and RAW? JPEG is a compressed format where you lose some information from the saved image. RAW format saves the image as taken without compression and has more ability to be manipulated. And that is in a nutshell, to be honest. How do I achieve sharp focus? Make sure that the focus point or points, because of course you can nowadays choose a single point or lots and lots up to hundreds nowadays, are on the part of the image that you want to be sharp. People make the mistake where they have the point dead in the middle of the area that they're going to take, and the subject that they want sharp is actually to the right, so you have to move that point to the right. So do be careful. So manually focus, making sure that the part of the image you want to be sharp is sharp. So if you've got time, you can use manual to make sure it is sharp. Keep going on. What's the difference between zoom and digital zoom? So zoom is the zoom where you twist the barrel, and that's the optical part. So that works optically in the lens. So it's zooming in and out in the lens. The digital part makes it so that when you are twisting the barrel, or however electrically operating it, whatever, then it's going further and further and choosing a smaller part of the sensor to record the image on. So that's digital zoom. So do be careful with those. Digital zooms can take you right up to nowadays 3,500 millimeter, but what it's done, it's zoomed in on the sensor, so it will give you a poorer quality image, and you can switch this zoom and digital zoom off. So the digital section you can turn off so it stops halfway. Hope you've read that, but that's a quick answer to that one. Focus peaking. Very, very good to have focus peaking. It's the ability to turn it on in the camera. You've got to turn it on in the menu section, which will allow the area of an image to glow a certain colour. So the bit that's in focus goes yellow, red, black, whatever colour you set it, if you've got the ability to set it to different colours. You can use it. Some people say to me, can you use it on autofocus? Yes and no. No, it won't come up automatically, but if you autofocus and then you just gently touch the manual focusing ring, it will light up the area with the peaking that's in focus. Depending on the f-stop, the glowing area will be shallow or greater when you view through the viewfinder. Greater for higher f-stops, 16, shallower for lower f-stops, f4. Some acronyms for you now. Shooting on. As I say, I know that I've got plenty of time during this evening, but there is a bit to come yet. Some of the newer members may be a little bit confused by some of the abbreviations that they see from members of the committee in emails, etc. So here are a few that we regularly use. POTY, that's just abbreviation for Photographer of the Year. Now that's the competition that this nature comp is that's coming up. That is a competition within the 6 that we do for the Photographer of the Year. LPA, Lincolnshire Photographic Association. It's an association that brings together the 21, I think it's still 21 member clubs throughout Lincolnshire together through the LPA, so that we can have various competitions and various things that they provide throughout the year. sRGB. RGB is just red, green and blue, as I explained earlier. RGB is just red, green, blue. sRGB is standard RGB, and Adobe RGB is an Adobe abbreviation of the color format that they use within their program. CMYK, it's used in color printing, so it's nothing to do with the image unless you're sending that image to be printed. So when I get an image to be printed, my printer looks at that image in CMYK. So it's only used for colour printing, and the letters stand for cyan, magenta, yellow and black. I don't know why they didn't put B for black, but it's K for the last word of black. The K stands for black, K being the last letter of black. TIFF, Tagged Image File Format. JPEG, Joint Photographic Expert Group. They're only all little abbreviations for a longer word. So JPEG versus TIFF or TIFF. Some people say double F, some people say the other. JPEG uses lossy compression, meaning that some image data is lost when the file is compressed. That means if you only take a picture in JPEG, you won't have as much information to work with. TIFF files really, I shouldn't have put very large. TIFF files are usually larger in comparison to JPEG because they're not compressed and they keep the information. If you keep opening a TIFF file and closing it down again, it'll keep more information. Depth of field, DOF. That's depth of field, the difference between the nearest and furthest points that will be in acceptable sharp focus within the image. So there's an example, and it doesn't tell you a lot unless you know what you're looking at. So I'll quickly explain. This top image, I'm going to call this one taking a picture of this rabbit at f2.8, or on some of your lenses either 3.5 or f4. That might be the lowest that you can get your lens to. So 2.8 would give you a shallow or a narrow depth of field. Now if you then put your f-stop up to f16, f20, it gives you a large depth of field, or I generally call that a greater depth of field, meaning that more's in focus. Now this little bit here won't ever be in focus unless you know how to use the various methods that you can choose to get that bit in focus, because infinity always looks in focus because it's so far away. So your aim is to get infinity in focus and this bit near you, but we can go into that another time. So on to some more. DPI, dots per inch. Now DPI is totally different to PPI. DPI, dots per inch, used in the printing process. PPI is pixels per inch, which when Jill says to you, can you make sure you send your images to me no larger than 3,500 pixels on the largest side, then that's what she's referring to, PPI, not DPI. They are two totally different things. Usually the first measurement that you get in the scale is the width of the image on, say, the landscape, or if it's a portrait, still the width of the image. ISO, International Organization Standard, TTL through the lens usually refers to what we said earlier, flash, but can refer to other photographic measurements taken through the lens. ICM, intentional camera movement. Going to explain that one. So whereas we all strive to make sharp images, Doreen strives to get a lot of them really blurry, and a lot of others member of the camera club do so as well now, and it's called intentional camera movement. And I actually never used to use it until Doreen started showing us how to, and now I actually explain how to do it in training when I do the training for customers. So intentional camera movement to make your image blurry. HDR, high dynamic range. It takes multiple pictures and merges them all into one, compresses it so it makes the dark bits brighter, the bright bits darker, etc, etc, and so it gives you a more overall even image. AE, automatic exposure. I'm just going to go through these quickly because, as you will see in a few minutes, there is a few of them. Autofocus, area autofocus, that's on a Nikon. AFC, continuous autofocus Nikon, and that's where this one here, all cameras are different, so consequently if you had a Canon camera, it was I've totally forgotten now, it's gone from me. Auto continuous focus, somebody write it on the thing, because somebody's thinking about it for me now. I've got that many things going around in here at the moment. AFS, single autofocus. AFS, silent autofocus. Aperture priority, Nikon. So these are the different abbreviations and what's written. So we'll get to shutter later on. Bulb, birds in flight, black and white. Here's a very quick one for you now. I'm just going to go through these and let you choose what you want out of these, and I'm sure that you're following very, very slowly, but when I was sent in a few of these abbreviations to explain, I thought I'd see what there was and how many of these things actually exist and how many we do use, but do we actually know what they're all for? So here's not just a few of them, here's quite a lot of them. So I'll start clicking the button a little bit quicker and you can pick up the one or two that you want to. If you want to come back at a later date and look at any of these, then you can do so by just going to the video and looking about 45 minutes into the video, and you will see a few of these. And it was, I must admit, it was Jill who sent me the first one or two, and so after you couldn't think of many of them, Jill, there was plenty out there that you could have used, so don't ever feel that you're lost for the abbreviations for various uses, etc. I'm just going to go back one because QXD is a memory card format. Now, yeah, Canon AI Servo, that was what the Canon is. Thank you, Jill. XQD is a format used in some cameras. Now, if you're looking to buy a camera with XQD, do be ready to spend a lot of money on memory cards because they are expensive. Best camera settings. There is no such thing as best camera settings. So if we look at landscape, this was a question that was sent in about landscape photography and what's the best settings. Honestly, there isn't really a best settings because everything would depend upon what you want in focus, what you want the depth of field to be, what the type of day is. Do you want a long exposure to get the cloud movement? Do you want everything to be sharp? Do you want a certain part of the image to be sharp? So I can't really say that there is such a thing. If you want a good sharp image with no cloud movement, then you need to be here at f16. You need a shutter speed hand holdable if you're hand holding, or it doesn't matter if you're on a tripod, but if you're on a tripod and use a slow shutter speed, make sure that you use a cable release or an electronic release of some sort. Don't forget though that cropped sensors, that means some Canon sensors, Nikon sensors that are a crop, for instance Nikon a 1.5, Canon a 1.6 crop sensors, they have a different bearing on f-stops, giving you a greater depth of field, and those calculations you'll have to look up in the relevant places to get the exact difference, but cropped sensors will give you greater depth of field. Now if you're looking at the new Olympus cameras and the Panasonic cameras, then they're micro four thirds, which means they're 2 times sensors, which means it multiplies everything up by 2. So, you know, there is differences. Hang on, let me have a drink. Right, off we go again. We've only got 2 slides here, so we're getting very well into the end. And there's one question that I'm going to answer after the break. So, polarizing filter. This filter is mainly used for adding colour to the sky, but it will also have some effect on the tones of grass, etc. It can be used to minimise reflections on water and help to stop glare. Excuse me. Be careful when using this filter, as it works best when you are placed 90 degrees from the sun's rays, or from the sun, whichever way you want to put it. So if you stand with your back to the sun, you won't get a lot of effect from the filter. You'll think to yourself, why isn't it working like it did last time? It's because of the angle you are to the sun. So do be careful with that. It works absolutely brilliantly if used in the right context. We do have in the programs nowadays various things that we can use that act like a polarizing filter, but they don't do the same job. So, continuous autofocus and back button focus. A question came in. All of these have been questioned basically, but I stopped putting question and answer. Continuous focus is where the camera will continue to focus as long as the photographer is half pressing the shutter and must keep the focus point on the subject for that part of the image to be sharp that they want to be imaged. And it's usually or generally used for moving subjects. So this part goes back to the cycling question, and generally it would be used in continuous focus all the time. Now if you're using front button focusing, that means half a press will be focusing and then you press to take the picture. And if you're in continuous focusing with continuous, as Jill put it, auto servo or continuous tracking, as you press, and it'll keep taking pictures, and it will also keep tracking the subject whilst it's taking the picture and changing all along, all the time. If the photographer is a back button, and possibly now some of you saying, what's back button focusing? Well, you have a button, as you have the shutter button on the front, you have a button on the back that you can change in the menu to use for the focusing purposes. So as you press the back button, it will focus, and if it's on autofocus, if it's on continuous focus, it will continually keep focusing. And the front button, will only take the picture. It takes away the half press mechanism from the front, but you have to change that in the camera to do so. As with all of these questions this evening, if you've got a question and it's gone straight over here, just drop me a line and I'll explain a little bit more. You will need to start the continuous autofocus in the focus settings. Also, if you want to use back button focusing, you will need to change the operation in your menu settings, and as I've just said, you will lose the focus operation from the front shutter button. Now, some of the older cameras, you could still have it on the front button and the back button, but that was a continuous no, it just didn't work. If you want to use autofocus for something that is going parallel to you in front of you, then you can use the back button for the focusing when it gets parallel in front of you, or like an aeroplane in the sky. Once you've got lock on focus, you can let go of the back button and you can just keep taking pictures with the front button. But if it's something that's coming round in a curve, then as you track it, you have to keep your thumb on the back button and keep taking pictures. I've tried it many times on back button focusing. I don't get on with it. So I'm sorry, folks, but for me, I want to use one finger. Why use two fingers when you can use one? I just can't. People say they prefer one to the other because, well, my because never became a because I couldn't work it out. So front button focusing for me personally. So, and I do believe that's just sent everything black. So I'm a minute late. We have another question after the break, so I'll see you all back here after I've had a good drink, and we'll see you at 8:10. So thanks for watching up to present. We'll see you in the